and they wanted the party's perspective on some of the issues in the public domain. It was a good meeting, and I commend the Private Sector Commission and its membership for being so interested in the transparency for the upcoming elections. They expressed concerns about instability and how instability could affect their well-being and the people who work with them. And I've pointed out that they have no, or they should have no concern about the PPP stoking any instability or any violence surrounding the elections. We have a track record that will show that in our entire history that we have always supported free and fair elections, and we've been a calming influence on people, even in periods when they've been tested and their patience tried, that we've always stood for peace, stability, respect for the dignity of our people, and we've fought against violence perpetrated by the opposition. I assured them that the government, although I was speaking as General Secretary, that the government is going to address the question of security robustly to ensure that the people of this country, they can exercise their constitutional right to select a government freely and fairly in a manner that will not lead them to be intimidated or causing violence to suppress their votes. They mentioned the issues of the voters list, what they've been hearing in the public domain, and I think that in most quarters there is a recognition now that the PNC and AFC, they have been misleading their supporters and also maybe themselves. By now, most Guyanese would recognize that constitutionally you cannot remove people's name from the voters list who have gone through the robust process and scrutinized process of being registered. And why do I say a robust process? It's the registration process is one that is highly scrutinized. It doesn't require only GECOM taking your name down and collecting your biometrics. That is a fingerprint, but it's done in the presence of scrutineers from the government and opposition in all of these registration centers. And then people have the opportunity to object to those names if they find that the registration is flawed, etc. So once you go through the process of registration, it's unconstitutional to have your name removed unless you die. And that is clear. There have been several rulings to that effect, and I think any right-minded person would recognize that any attempt to obfuscate it, as they are trying to do in their recent attempt to go back to the court on a matter that has already been litigated and ruled upon, it is all that is doomed to fail. And it's not because the list is flawed or because there is some sinister motive to steal the elections. It is part of our Constitution and law. If you get on the list, you cannot be removed except if you die. So migration is not an excuse. They are attempting to say now that we should go back through this exercise. So if we don't find you at home, you've migrated like temporarily or you've traveled abroad, your name should be removed from the voters list. So if you come back the day before the elections to vote, which is your constitutional right to do so, you wouldn't be able to do so. One challenge, one court case would stop the whole elections if we were to do that. A person who was on the list was taken off because you couldn't find that person. They're now resident in Guyana because that's unconstitutional. And this has been in the Constitution for decades. So I believe that's the objective. The objective is they already see they're going to lose the elections, so they want to repeat what happened with the Pereira case. Either to stop the elections, get an individual to file a case in the court days before the elections to say my name has been removed because they couldn't find me on the day that they came around, and I can't exercise my constitutional right. And then the elections get delayed. So we're not going to fall into that trap. And I think the private sector and every right-thinking Guyanese have seen through their antics that they have been engaged in, that it's all a smokescreen, one, to prevent the elections or to create confusion around the election, or to get an excuse after they lose the elections as to why they lost. They would say the list was padded. As I pointed out in the past, in 2020, the list had 660,000 over that number, and only 460,000 voted because of the robust system in the polling place to prevent fraud, which is scrutinized by the polling agents of the different political parties. And they do have biometrics in the polling station to recognize you, which is a folio with your picture ID there, so that it's not just a name. They have a folio with your picture ID. They can't prevent you from voting without a card. So if you don't have your ID card or your passport, you cannot be prevented from voting, but you have to take an oath. And that is because of the ruling that from the court by Claudette Singh when she was a judge, in the Esther Pereira case. So that the biometrics matter to prevent voting or to vote has already been decided by the courts a long time ago by the person who is now chairing GECOM and ruled illegal in the past. You cannot prevent that. So on those two grounds, on biometrics and on the quality of the voters list, or the so-called padding of the voters list, we dealt extensively with that. And I said, we don't want anyone to do what the PPP wants. We want GECOM to act lawfully and in accordance with the Constitution of Guyana. As I had said in the past here when I was asked what do you want? And I said, what I want is immaterial. It is what is lawful, what is constitutional. That's all we're asking of GECOM. And they come under a lot of assault. Just today, GECOM has had to issue a statement by some responding to some elements in the opposition who've been saying, oh, there is a plot in GECOM to steal the elections. The chair constantly sides with the commissioners representing the government. It's all nonsense. It's all nonsense. They're just trying to undermine the credibility of GECOM to fit in with the plot, the bigger plot, and to claim they're cheated when they lose because they see the writing on the wall. So all of this is just a big hullabaloo over nothing. Over nothing. It's the typical behavior of the APNO. So we dealt extensively with all of these matters. I assured members of the private sector that people's race and their religion and their gender and their age are not factors that will be used in a divisive way in the campaign by the People's Progressive Party. In fact, I pointed out to them, and we can do so with a great deal of credibility, that we're the only multi-ethnic party in this country. We can do this credibly. No other party can say that. And so, because there was a fear that the divisive rhetoric will cause polarization as we get closer to the elections. And I assured people we have no interest in that. We're trying to bring people together. We're trying to change our party to work, and our plans are for all of Guyana. I pointed them in APNU's direction and AFC, and I pointed out how they use race cleverly in very creative ways, but it doesn't have the same sort of potency as the past. But they will not give up on that tool because of something that I've said to you repeatedly here at my press conference. They have no plan for the future, and that is clear as daylight when you listen to their musings, their ramblings at the press conferences. They have no clear plan for the future, no vision for Guyana that is all-encompassing, and they have no achievement. They have a very tiny list of achievements for the long period they've been in government historically. And they get very upset when you mention that. I'll deal with that a little bit later in the press conference. So these were some of the elements of the discussion that we had yesterday when I met with the private sector as General Secretary of the party. But we want elections on time. We want GECOM to act in an open, transparent, lawful manner. We want all the citizens of this country to have the right to choose their governments freely in a secure environment. And we, at least in the PPP, we intend to campaign on our track record and the fulfillment of our promises, not by dividing people, as the others want to do. I see the Minister of Finance has named Budget Day, and the President has given a brief overview of the focus of their budget in 2025. That is the budget to be presented shortly. And I want to re-emphasize what the President said, that the budget will be characterized by an enhanced focus on community issues, issues that have been raised by people in our numerous engagements when we visit these communities. And for anyone who is objective, you would see that this government has been in almost every community in the country repeatedly. People have an open opportunity to dialogue with the president, with the ministers. It gets live streamed. This level of transparency is unseen in many countries. If you look at the many countries in the region and globally, the citizens often are not afforded a direct contact with their leaders. And we have removed that barrier and the filters, and we have allowed direct engagement with the ministers. Sometimes it looks a bit messy. People raise issues and all of that, but it is a tool that this party will never give up on. That is allowing people to have their voices heard. We saw the level of elitism and aloofness by the last government. You had to go through layers of people to get to ministers. Ministers stopped recognizing their own friends and people who campaigned with them. They ignored them totally. They were living in a bubble. And we are committed to ensuring that that never happens. This is one of the hallmarks of the People's Progressive Party. Here too at Freedom House, you see hundreds of people come here every week. And even if we can't solve all of the issues, and it's impossible to solve all, at least they have a sympathetic ear and they get to meet someone. This is something we are not going to give up on. And it's positive for all of those who believe that, oh, we should not, the president should be maybe distant. He goes to all of these communities. And in one newspaper call it condescending. When the president visits the community, it's condescending. Imagine, that's access. Contrast that with Granger and when he was president. And so I think people appreciate that. And that's why hundreds of issues come up in these communities when you go there. People have raised several issues. They've raised the question of the national insurance scheme. And we have helped thousands of people who had issues with getting their NIS pension because of the employers not submitting their contributions or record of their contributions to the NIS. We have helped them now to get their pensions. There are several others who did not make the required 750 contributions to qualify for a pension. We didn't leave them out. We announced last year, the president announced, and it will be in this year's budget, a $10 billion allocation to assist all of those people who did not qualify, the thousands of people over the decades who did not qualify to get an NIS pension but made contributions to the NIS. They will get a lump sum of money. So we listen to people. We help to solve their problem. There are going to be thousands others who will benefit in the new budget from who did not make the pension, but they will get some money for the contributions that they made over the years. We listen to people about community roads. I remember going to Skeldon just as COVID was winding down, because we did not want to have large gatherings in the people period, in the COVID period. And at night, I finished my meeting, and at night we went into Crabwood Creek and people showed me the roads. Berbice had been totally neglected. Well, the whole country, but I'm just using Berbice. They had nothing, huge potholes everywhere. In the 5 years under APNU, all of the investments that we had made in community roads just disappeared. We were going back to the past. No focus on building community roads, they were all falling apart. Look at what has been done. It's hard now. We have less roads that are not paved now than roads that are paved in the last 3 years, because after COVID we focus on this in earnest. That's because we listen to people. So those who think we're spending too much money on fixing these roads, that came out from people. And not just here on the coast and in every region, but in every coastal region, but in the hinterland, we have done this too. So many communities now have seen in their communities roads being built that they never dreamt of, and connecting roads between communities that have made a significant difference in their lives, because we listen to people and we address those concerns. And many people complained about the health clinics in their villages. They didn't have a place to sit on. The place was dirty in the yard. We made some investments in these areas, not maybe adequate. They complain about the state of community infrastructure, the grounds, etc. And we started a campaign now to right across the country in the last few years to fix community grounds. I've spoken about this in the past. In Georgetown, we awarded contract for all 34 grounds in the city. These are community grounds from Agricola all the way to Cummins Lodge. And it's not only in Georgetown, but in Berbice, in Essequibo, right across the country. These were community type issues. So I'm not going to be comprehensive here today. I just want you to get the idea that we have been listening to people outside of the big issues that we have had to deal with. We have focused on community issues. But this year, there'd be an enhanced focus on additional community issues. The question of garbage disposal, the waste management has become a problem now in many of our communities. And so an enhanced focus on how we support these communities now to collect the garbage and dispose of it in a manner that would bring benefits to people in the communities without increasing the cost of doing it for the individual households. That will be part of the focus. We hear a lot about burial grounds. People say you should focus on the living, not the dead so much. But we hear a lot of those things about why aren't you cleaning this? Now, we will support a lot of the NDCs through more resources allocation in the budget for a lot of that sort of infrastructure, not just NDCs, but municipalities, the towns too, to ensure that we can do much more of these issues. So I'm not going to enumerate all of the things. Security across the country will be a big issue. Enhance investment in security for our people in the new budget. And then on the fiscal side, the new budget will incentivize people to work harder, because the taxation system would evolve in a manner that rewards those who make greater efforts and who work harder. So that's the principle for the budgetary tax measures that we are being guided by when we come up with the specific measures. And this is to ensure that the Guyanese population, both in the public sector and in the private sector, that they keep more money that they earn and less goes to paying taxes. So, for example, in the public sector, income has grown by $100 billion more per year from 2020. So clearly a massive growth in income. We have reduced taxes over the period from 2020 to now to ensure that of the $500 million in income per annum more in the public sector, that people keep more of that as disposable income. So it is income earned versus disposable income. And that is the idea here. We now have 60,000 more people in the private sector working who were not working in 2020. They are earning more money. So the taxation system would evolve in a way that would allow them to keep more of what they earn, particularly if they work harder. And you're going to see the specific measures in the budget to support this. These are just some key elements of or principles that will guide the 2025 budget. The focus on incentivizing those who work harder, growing more disposable income both in the public and the private sector through the taxation system, and then a focus on community issues that have arisen from our engagement with people. We have been addressing them, but an enhanced focus on addressing a lot of those issues. The budget, I expect the Minister of Finance, and he's very good at this, to point out the challenges of the past 4 years and to show the successes of our government too. And we will not be sidetracked from showing our successes in the budget. And so definitely he will talk about the issues that irk a lot of our detractors, that they want us not to talk about. He will be speaking of those things because they're worried about our repetition of these issues, not because they're not real, but because they don't have an answer to those questions. And what is this all about? So it just gives you an idea. There are two editorials that would tell you why they don't want us to mention these issues. So the first editorial is from this Kaichor News today to talk about Jagdeo and his news conference and how every week, first of all, they position themselves, the Kaichor News positions itself as the watchdog for the Guyanese public. The Kaichor News is not the watchdog for any person in the public. In fact, it's the political arm, the newspaper of a person who has declared himself as a candidate for the elections. If you're the watchdog and you're for the Guyanese public, then you should have a commitment to be truthful. But if you look through the Kaichor News, I can't find a single article that is reflective of objective reality. It's a bunch of lies that they tell all the time and distort things and peddle falsehoods for a political purpose. Now you enjoy constitutional protection and you will enjoy the defense of this government to publish, because we believe in free media and we believe in the right to publish even if the publication is critical of us, and you will have our full support for that. But you're not going to get compliance to your lies and cause us to dumb down or to be silent in the face of the distortion of facts. We will expose that, and this is what they can't handle, because week after week, at various fora, including at this press conference, we expose the lies of the Kiteshore News, so much so that it has no credibility whatsoever now in any circles. It's seen as a tabloid, and people don't pay serious attention to anything that is published there, because week after week this happens. We expose the lies. So it touches them in a manner that is, I think even in their pockets. So they try to link it to everything else, or maybe it's like Trump criticizing the media, I see in this editorial, and that they're lifting the scales from the eyes of the masses. Imagine the arrogance of this and how ludicrous it is for Kiteshore News to claim and that they are anything but a rag newspaper. But they don't want us. He is worried about my abuse. My abuse here every week, the abuse that he is worried about, is because I point out where they lie. And I emphasize our track record, what we have done. So they said Jagdeo speaks about, every week we hear about the plans to build the hospitals, a harbor bridge, miles of roads and schools, etc., and the checklist. But of course, what do you want us to talk about? These are issues that matter to the people of this country. You want us to talk about Glenn Lal and his checkered past? What do you want us to talk about if not the people's issues and how we have addressed them? And they don't want to talk about them because APNU never, their experience with trying to build a bridge across the Demerara River ended up in a scandal and Patterson being charged for the feasibility study alone. Doing a feasibility study illegally, basically, and with $160 million going to it to an unsolicited bid. That is their experience. In our case, it is happening now. You can see it happening. And I gather last night they had an unfortunate accident on the bridge. But you can actually see it. They don't want that. Why would the PPP want to talk about that? About what we want them to talk about, not what it's doing that would, when completed, will cause the lives of tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people. It will give them a benefit because they don't have to pay a toll and they can move easily across the two rivers, the convenience that it will cause, an enhancement of business. But we must not talk about that. We must talk about something else that they want us to talk about, and I'll come to that a little bit later. So that's editorial one. Don't talk about your track record. So this looks like another cut and paste, and I think the same person who wrote the last thing, I have a big suspicion who this person is, I think it's a reporter in the Starbuck News, was a particular beef with the government, did this editorial too. Having been caught with using the AI to generate a particular editorial in the last, they went back to this thing. It's almost like you can see one of those old-time PPP haters in camouflage writing this kind of editorial. So what about isms it's called? So the first thing is Durban, the Cliff Anderson Sports Complex. First thing, why do you have to put in AC in it? You could take the money and put the AC around the country. You don't need AC. And then, in another editorial, the AC is now working. And why aren't there bucket seats in as yet? And you spend 351, a whopping, astonishing 351 million. All legitimate questions. You can question how government spends different allocations. Legitimate. But what is it? Instead of addressing the current shortcomings, the all too familiar response is, what about Durban Park? So now we can't compare spending 351 million to enhance this facility for spending $1.6 billion for the Durban Park. They don't have bucket seats here. Durban Park has, I don't know what kind of seats there. So we can't compare spending 351 with $1.6 billion that they spent there, of which the audit report said 600 million is missing. And the 600 million that is missing is more than the 351 that we spent actually on the facility here. But why this government always goes back to the past? And they want to hide track record. Track record matters. When the people of this country gave you the mandate to run the country, you have to account to them for it. And how would they account for spending $1.6 billion and getting nothing out of it and 600 million missing? We must not speak about that. But they got a right to speak about the 351. Can't go back that far in the past. So they lament it because they don't want the comparisons, because people see it. And you go into the Cliff Anderson facility and it's going to improve. We put in bucket seats later if they love bucket seats there. And it will grow. But simultaneously, we built in Linden 2 facilities, in one ICC lights and the other with FIFA lights, a track there. We're building one in New Amsterdam now, a track there, world-class track. We're building another stadium in Berbice. We've just, Anna Regina now would become a world-class facility. We're expanding right across the country. We're upgrading facilities. Told you earlier about the other things. Compare the two. But we must not compare, because in the comparisons they look bad. So let's don't go back to the past. Never mind, the same people are competing against us and pontificating on how we are doing things. But we must not say what they did when they were in government. So that was one element. So then it goes on to say, imagine your current child failing a school subject and casting blame on a teacher from the last term. This is the rationale employed by politicians who think incessantly referencing the past is sufficient to distract the electorate from their shortcomings. We're not referencing the past to distract the population from our shortcomings. We are referencing the past to show the magnitude of our achievements. Not our shortcomings, but the magnitude of our achievements. You had zero hospital that you were going to build. You had no plan. You had drug shortages, etc. Look at the plan that we have now. That's why we reference what you did. You made a mess of it all. You had no scholarship. You had a few scholarships for ministers and their families alone. We already got 50,000 people studying, paid for by the government now. You increase UG fees. We promise free education at university. We're delivering it. We're referencing the past to show the comparisons between the two. We reference what they promised in their 2015 manifesto and what they did not do, which is almost everything in their manifesto, to say they're untrustworthy. They're good at making promises, but they're empty promises. You need to do that to show the nature of the AFC and APNU. Because they're coming to recast themselves, and you know what? In the recasting of themselves as Democrats and leaders now, the past comes back to haunt them, and they don't want that. So they get their stooges in these places to, oh, why you have to go back and mention the people's past. But that is important for the electorate to compare parties, because the elections are about comparison of parties, and they're about believing who will fulfill their promise. And I keep asking, if you were a young Guyanese now, or any Guyanese for that matter, who would you believe, under which government would you believe that you would have the possibility of owning a plot of land and a house? Look back historically. And it would be the unequivocal answer. Whether you're APNU person or not, you would say PPP. And who would you believe that under which government it's easier to find, your road would be fixed? It's PPP. That is the comparison that people make. They don't want that. So the younger the voting demographic, the same editorial goes on to say Burnham and Chetty are from a different era, and we should leave them there. They should tell APNU to leave its racism of the past in that era too. They don't tell them that. But and I think they were offended that I pointed out that Burnham was, as a sitting prime minister of an independent Guyana, was on the CIA payroll, confirmed by the documents that have been released online. And these are not opinions, they are records of documents that were classified and are now being declassified by the CIA and others. So for 5 years after he was the prime minister of independent Guyana, he was still collecting money from the CIA, which is a foreign agency. And the CIA and the others, the CIA and the British Secret Service, their role in dividing our population along ethnic lines, which they did in Africa using tribalism. If you go to Kenya and Tanzania and all these places, you will see their role there, that they divided people because they wanted to continue to perpetuate their own rule. They did that here, but he was in the pocket of those agencies, being paid by them. And that's clear as daylight. That's inconvenient for me, for them now that I mention this. But it's part of our history. Young people need to know that history too. I'm not saying we should be stuck in that era of what happened, but we need to know the history, because they paint themselves as glorious in the past, and that the PPP is unpatriotic, and they were the bastions of patriotism and all of that nonsense. So when you talk about track record, and I did it in the context of 75 years of struggle on behalf of the people of this country and 75 years of working to change the lives of people in this country by the PPP. We have a proud record on that. So on extrajudicial killing, why did I have to mention Walter Rodney and Father Dark, who were killed in that period? They were killed by, and there were commissions of inquiry, international commissions of inquiry, that concluded that the PNC killed Walter Rodney. Now, what was the era? I was talking about political repression in an era when we did not have democracy. And that was part of our history too. So we must not talk about that. What about the extrajudicial killing today and stuff like that? People have a right to talk about it. They talk every day and lie about it too, extrajudicial killing. But we must not talk about Walter Rodney, one of our greatest scholars, a person who, when I go to Africa, until now, like many of the leaders in Africa, these are prime ministers, presidents, etc., they were inspired by Walter Rodney. Many of them were taught by him in university, etc. You should go back, and that was the WPA that mattered in the past. Now this WPA is a set of racists, that's all they do, and opportunists. They sat with APNU that killed the PNC, that killed Walter Rodney, their leader. They went into government with them, contented themselves with just taking cushy jobs, never helped anyone, and they're reacting from the loss of privileges now. They're a shadow of themselves. That was the party, Walter Rodney's party. When you look at it, at them today, you see zero, a set of opportunists and racists. Walter Rodney used to lecture at our party's school, Acrobat College, the PPP school where it was trained, that's the name, Acrobat College. And so I must not mention that, because why do we need to go back? And then they end up with a cycle of endless aboutism. We're not talking about aboutism, we're talking about real plans. So this is it. It's interesting to read this editorial. It is an apology, an excuse for all of those people. It's a convenient narrative now. Oh, don't go back to the past. Cathy, you said it at our press conference in the presence of all the AFC leaders. We're not taking questions from that period. That's the past, 4 years ago. So our track record doesn't matter. Our betrayal of the people don't matter. Our corruption didn't matter. Our lack of support for national development doesn't matter. We want to start afresh. But we want to criticize, we want to criticize what the PPP is doing. It's only two comparisons that you learn. And then you can isolate for yourselves. But this is an inconvenient narrative. So every week they're going to come at this. Every one of them, they're all singing from the same hymn sheet today. Don't go back to the past. Just mention the things we want to do. So they're trying to steer the elections to practically one issue because they have nothing else to talk about. So this, as I said before, no track record on education, health, job creation, infrastructure, etc. On democracy, they're trying to hide their track record on that because they stole the elections. So the only issue they're trying to make the election about, that's why you see a lot of it, is about the Exxon deal and renegotiation, one issue. But in trying to make this an electoral issue and to blame the PPP somehow for it, they're coming up with a big roadblock. And the roadblock is, who signed the agreement? Who signed this bad agreement? So, in as much when they push that narrative out there, people say, but isn't it convenient now? You're talking about the PPP not renegotiating, but you signed this agreement that is so lopsided. You're the one who did not put in ring fencing. You're the one who didn't agree to a 2% royalty rate. You're the ones who agreed to a 10%, a zero tax rate, a 75% of the revenue should go to cost recovery, all these issues. You're the ones who agreed to do this, including that Exxon should keep the decommissioning fund. Why are you blaming the PPP for this? You were in government, you signed this voluntarily, nobody held a gun to your head. So they are faced with that. And then they're faced with the fact that they hid the agreement. The agreement was not made public until December of 2017. It was signed in June of 2016. Nobody could have got a copy. Everybody was fighting for it. All the newspapers, the opposition saying, make public the agreement you signed. They refused to do it a year and a half. Then, December 2017, that's when they released it. In the year and a half, they had also collected 18 million US that they denied collecting, and then subsequently said, when exposed that they had collected the money, they said thought it was a gift. So that's their track record. So anybody who wants to blame the PPP for this would say, why are you blaming PPP? This is what you did in the period when you're in government. So that's very inconvenient to them. So they discovered something. They have to find a way of attaching us now to the deal that was there, that was made. So this was the new thing now. Jagdeo, as opposition leader, secretly agreed with coalition government to waive taxes to Exxon. This is the new thing to link the PPP to the agreement, because they find it inconvenient now to come after us. Kite News bombshell. Jagdeo secretly agreed with coalition to waive taxes. This is their bombshell. That's the news, front page news. So this is, so people are saying they got to be stupid about this. Where did this come from now? How come they didn't discover this all the years? We're now just coming up to elections, and now PPP agreed to the bad agreement in 2016. So the origin of this is in Trotman's book, which came out a long time back, and people recognize this as the biggest act of fiction since maybe the beginning of time, since Noah's days. So nobody pays any attention to what Trotman writes. He is just justifying the past when what he did. He got Exxon to prepare the cabinet paper that he took to approve the same agreement. So what did Trotman say in the book that led them to believe this bombshell thing now? The book was always there in only a year now. So we're getting closer to election. So this is what he said. Interestingly, I've been previously informed that the leader of the opposition had been briefed and would offer no objection. And further, I should not elaborate too much on the specifics of the June 27 agreement, Exxon deal, except to note that it had been signed and to list some of the provisions. This advice I followed. So who told him this? He didn't say who told him this. Who advised him? He'd been previously informed that the leader of the opposition had been briefed. Briefed by whom? Exxon, by the PNC. He didn't even say whom. This is Trotman saying somebody telling you. A vagrant walked off the street and said to Trotman, you know, Jagdeo has been briefed. You don't need to give the Guyanese public this agreement. But although Jagdeo calling for it to be released as opposition leader, every day we've been calling, and all the newspapers are calling. Don't worry with Jagdeo calling for it. The vagrant said he'd been briefed. You only need to speak about a couple of things. Don't release no agreement. The vagrant told him not to release the agreement. That was the secret deal that I had with APNU. You think if I had a deal with APNU, they'd be loved to. All these years, they would have mentioned it, they would shout at the top of their voices, they're taking out ads. So this is their source now, the vagrant, Trotman, a vagrant told him that. And then Lalbachan Ram, Christopher Ram, now known as Christopher Ram, he repeated this in his recycled arguments about the renegotiation. It lacks erudition. They just fill up the pages of the newspaper with nonsense. And I don't think they're so caught up with themselves that they don't recognize, as was pointed out by so many people who wrote subsequently, that they are just using recycled arguments and offer no real justification for the key issues at hand. It's just an emotive issue that they hope will win votes at the. So I'm not going to focus on Christopher Ram and this attempt. But he repeated the same thing. They knew that. And then this results in the headline. So let me tell you about what really took place. Any fool, or if Christopher Ram or the others wanted to do research, if they were really studied, as Leonard Craig said, AFC is just all make-believe, the leaders. What we've been saying a long time, that they're just fake intellectuals. They just run off, talk off the top of their head, and like he just devastated Vincent Adams. This his pretense at knowing things, his tenure at the EPA would be described in textbooks as one of sycophancy. And I don't know how he got the job, but quick to point out his credentials. He worked somewhere else. I've seen lots of that. People put their CV up and they really don't know anything. And I take Leonard Craig and his thoughtfulness any day above the entire leadership of the AFC. He is a thoughtful person and he thinks things through. And it would be a good thing to read his letter and see the vile response from the AFC. Just read his letter. If you have a chance, he knows the inner workings of that party because he was in their leadership. I think he was Deputy General Secretary at one time. And it was, I couldn't characterize them better than he did. So if they had only researched the topic, they would find out that the motion to enshrine the tax matters, this in the Exxon agreement. If you look at the Hansards, you will see that this matter was brought to Parliament. They say that It was brought to Parliament. This is what was brought to our Parliament, not the agreement, because people think that the agreement was brought to Parliament in August of 2016. This one-page order was brought to Parliament for affirmative action. That means the majority of members in the Parliament, once it's presented, could say yes. They are the majority. It was brought at, as Gail Teixeira pointed out, it was on a supplementary order paper. So it was not on the order paper, supplementary order paper for that day. It was the members of the Parliament on our side, as Gail Teixeira pointed out in her presentation, saw it at 7:47 in the night, the same day it was presented to Parliament. The debate on this issue started at 11:47 in the night. 11:47. So if you look at the debate in the Parliament, Winston Jordan said, so there were two members of Parliament from our side who spoke. It was Odinga Lumumba and Gail Teixeira. Odinga was on the Natural Resources, the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee on Natural Resources. So he led. This is what he said when they presented this one-pager, the motion. I am disappointed that we've been told about this motion on Friday, at least today at 2 o'clock. That is when it came on the order paper, and then they got the motion circulated later in the night, came on the order paper. I'm chairman of the Parliamentary Sectoral Committee on Natural Resources, and I was not informed about this motion here tonight. We cannot carry on like this in this country. We cannot carry on like this. This is Odinga speaking. Big oil is important, but big oil has already also shaken up the roots of many countries, whether it be Nigeria, whether it be Ghana, whether it be Venezuela. We have to be careful. Therefore, we have to work together. Informing us early about this motion cannot and will not allow us to say no. How can we? First of all, you have a one-seat majority. Secondly, we've been supportive of oil exploration and development for a number of years because we've been supportive of it. They found the oil under the PPP just before the government change. So we've always been supportive. What is the problem? Why is there this secrecy? It makes us feel funny. It makes us feel there is a hidden agenda. It's not a laughing matter. They laughed. It's not a laughing matter. It's a question of nationalism. It's not a laughing matter. We cannot embrace the future of our country in secrecy, in darkness. We have to do it in light. What are we afraid of? Minister Jordan has said that the current, and then it goes on. So Odinga, in the speech in Parliament, was complaining about the motion that came there to be passed the same night to give effect to an agreement that we hadn't seen, because the agreement was signed in June, but this was just the order to bring the tax benefits in place, but it didn't say what taxes. It's just an order, one-pager. So that I can go on to talk about Gail Teixeira, but so Gail spoke about 17:55 p.m. tonight was when she saw it. let me read Gail Teixeira here. In other words, the written laws referred to are the Income Tax Act, the Income Tax in Aid of Industry Act, Corporation Tax, and Property Tax. In other words, we are being asked in this House by the motion to support the order which talks about an agreement between the companies and the government of Guyana, waiving or removing the requirements of paying taxes, income tax, in aid of industry, corporation, and property tax, based on an agreement with the government of Guyana. However, what I seem to have missed in the minister's presentation was for how long this will take place, because we did not have the agreement at that time. I would ask the minister to be patient with me, because I said this before June 2018, but because I think he said June 2018, but I may have missed it. So if this is the agreement, how long will 51(2) not apply to the production sharing agreement with these companies? Is this 1, 2, 3, 5, or 10 years? She was asking about the tax benefits to Exxon under this agreement. We're asking. No answers, no agreement there, just passing it through because they had the majority of the vote. However, and I skip, however, when we are talking about production sharing agreements in which the coffers of Guyana would be lessened, or we are giving concessions, obviously we want people to come here. We also have to say under what conditions this agreement will hold. Is it for, as I said, a honeymoon period just until oil starts sprouting out? Is it 5 or 10 years? This is what Gail goes on said, and we have no apologies to make. We find this unacceptable. We are not comfortable with this agreement, and she was only talking about an agreement that we had not seen. This is the position. I don't want to go through too much. So in the parliament, Jordan says in his presentation they're strengthening the benefits. We did not see an agreement. We asked, they signed the agreement in June of the year. They brought an order for affirmative action to rush through one night to give effect to the agreement and the benefits, but nobody saw the agreement until a year and a half after. Imagine they took to Parliament to approve, did not share with the other members of Parliament the agreement at which they were referring to. Trotman cleverly created the impression that it was the 1999 agreement signed by Janet Jagan, that we didn't bring this enabling order under the Petroleum Act of 1986. And Jordan spoke about strengthening the benefits for the people of the country in an agreement we had not seen, that we were in the public domain asking for. You heard the two persons who spoke there, but we were not negative. We wanted to support the growth of the industry, not like this government that is hostile to government on everything. We said, share with us what's gonna happen. How long would this agreement last? What's the duration of the tax holidays and everything else? Gail Teixeira, it's in our answer. Had they spoken, had they just looked at this, not spoken, researched this, they would see that this here, the lie that they're telling here, that we had secretly agreed with the coalition, was just a plain lie. We were fighting to get the agreement released. This is the history of it. So this is what they're trying to do now. That's why I think they're trying to link us back to this bad agreement they signed, because you can't, our tenure, our stewardship of the oil and gas sector is characterized by gas to energy. It's character that we're working on. It's a local content law. It's the new Petroleum Activities Bill, updating the 1986 one. It's the stronger environmental permits, a whole range of it's auction now, a new PSA, a whole range of stuff like that. It's positive. And so somehow to get rid of all of this strong track record, we had secretly agreed, because the vagrant told Trotman that Jagdeo had agreed with them. The track record will prove differently. They did not release this agreement until a year and a half after it was signed, after they had a big public uproar over it, led by the People's Progressive Party, with me as opposition leader. Every week I spoke of this agreement that they would not release. We haven't seen it. We'd like to see the agreement. How could we have agreed with something that we didn't see? So they're using this clever thing, the motion that they bring, where we express concern about it, to say, oh, they agreed with the agreement, with the 2016 agreement. It is typically Leonard, Craig, how quickly the shine disappears from people. And I think by now, every Guyanese would recognize that the AFC is probably even more, they're actually worse than the PNC for me. Worse. Because they lie, they have no position, they have no commitment to anything. They think you can bullshit people and get away with it, and they get exposed every week. Look how from the rising star Nigel Hughes now he looks dumb and blunt and thin-skinned. And that's why they had to go after Craig. In such a short historical period, the blunders that they have made, I don't think you can match that for a political party. It's hard. Even PNC would not do that. The gas to energy project, they lied to the people and just moved on. They just move on. They said, oh, there's no loan. You're not going to get the loan. They moved on now that the loan is approved. He refused to answer the Exxon conflict situation, where he said, and my client interest would prevail above Guyana. Left that hanging. Left hanging also how much money is collected over the years from and his role in the 2016 agreement, Nigel Hughes. Left that hanging. The apology for their role in the election, they reviewed. 1 week they're doing the review, the next week they're not doing the review, the next week they're blaming GECOM for the delay in the review. Then he goes to court and says the elections were not rigged. They were not rigged, but he is now considering whether they should issue an apology for the rigged elections. Confusion again. He says they're not taking questions from the past. Which party says that? They admitted they had no plan for the future. He wants to get the government to sit with him and work out a plan for the future of the country. No plans for the future on their own. The Warao issue just showed the lack of commitment to anything. Thought it was a political issue, then discovered the Waraos are not going to vote